So here's another story that took place in Colorado in Hinsdale County in a small town called Lake City. Population about 300 year round, swells up to about 3,000 in the summertime with all the fishermen and the jeepers, four by fours and dirt bikes and all that. But it was November of 1994, and there was a Bonnie and Clyde type couple who were on a robbing spree in this area of Colorado. Um, and the guy's name was Mark, and the woman's name was Ruth. And they were just driving around armed with guns and robbing little convenience stores and gas stations. And so the Lake City was warned that they might be heading to Lake City. So the Hinsdale County Sheriff Roger Coursey set up a roadblock right outside of town. And the roadblock was right here. Right here is where the roadblock was. If you drive past here, you'll see a little marker, a memorial marker for that sheriff. I'm getting ahead of myself, but he had a roadblock here, and Mark and Ruth, the Bonnie and Clyde, came down from this. This is called Slumgullion. You can see this yellow stuff that's sliding down. They call that slum, and this is Slumgullion Pass. So they came down and came up to Sheriff Roger Coursey's roadblock, and Mark just opened fire on Sheriff Roger and shot him in the chest. Don't know why he wasn't wearing a bulletproof vest, and he died there pretty quickly. And then though that Mark and Ruth, they quickly drove down the road and pulled off somewhere along here, and I don't know exactly where they went, but they went up one of these dirt roads and went up some back road where nobody was, nobody saw where they went, and they hid their vehicle behind some trees, and they sat down, and they just were really remorseful, and they wrote a note. We are really, really sorry. We didn't really mean to take someone's life. And then Mark and Ruth agreed to commit suicide, and Mark shot Ruth in the head and then shot himself in the head. And what was interesting is they were on the 10 most wanted list for about a month, and the manhunt for them searched everywhere, high and low, and were positive that they had gotten out of the Lake City area. And so they were checking in Gunnison and Montrose and Grand Junction and all these areas around, thinking that they had gotten out of this area. And it wasn't until about a month later that somebody hiking around came across their I think semi-frozen bodies, because it was in late November. It was actually November 18th. And so a couple, I think it was a few days later, week later, Roger Coursey's funeral was going on, and right in the middle of his funeral, there was a VW van registered to a woman in Gunnison, Colorado, which is about an hour and 15-minute drive north of Lake City. And that van came down to Lake City, drove out here past out here to Capital City. This is called Capital City right here, and parked that VW van. And that a person got out of the van, and they got on cross-country skis, and there was lots of snow, so this was all documented that a lone skier, skied from Capital City up this road all the way up to the top. This is called North Henson Road, all the way up to this property, which my uncle owned this property in 1994, and he built a log cabin on this spot right here. And whoever the skier was, they took 5-gallon cans of gasoline that was on site, because it was not it was a construction site, not totally complete, and that skier poured gasoline all over the cabin, lit it, burnt it to the ground, and then skied cross country skied back down the road, back down, and the detectives were able to identify these ski tracks that went both ways back to the VW van. There was some spot, maybe a mile or two in, where there was a what do you call it? A large tree had fallen over, crossing the road, and so that cross-country skier, you could tell in the snow and the powder of the snow that that skier had to take their skis off, climb over the top of the log, and put their skis on the other side of the log, and you'll understand why I'm telling you that in a minute. There's a local guy. He's actually the mayor now. His name's Bruce Vierheller, and he owned a little cabin out here in Capital City. He has a home in Lake City, but a little cabin in Capital City. And a lot of locals will write down the license plate numbers of vehicles just as a course of habit, not out of concern that somebody's doing something bad, but just so if somebody says, hey, somebody's missing or a tourist is missing, you know, locals often have written down the license plate numbers. And so when it was identified an arson had burnt down the cabin on that day, Bruce Vierheller came forward and identified that VW van. So the trail led to the woman in Gunnison, and the woman in Gunnison had loaned her van to her boyfriend, and it turned out her boyfriend was an outward bound instructor, and the previous summer he had taken a group of kids outward bound up to this cabin area, and some of the kids from the outward bound who were with him on that trek could remember how angry he was when they hiked and went past this cabin, and so there were witnesses that, you know, he you know, so basically this crime was really connected to him, but the DA didn't think they had enough to have a jury of his peers prosecute him, and they dropped the case. And my uncle was very upset, put his heart and soul into that cabin, and burnt to the ground by a guy that he knew did it. One interesting thing was that 2 summers before, I had been up here and camped out up here on the property before there was a cabin, and there was a worker, a real tough, rough dirt biker, not dirt biker, like biker gang type, tattoo, rough convict type guy named Tomas. And Tomas was up there doing some bulldozing and preparing the site for construction. And it was interesting, a few years later, this guy was on the loose, you know, never got prosecuted. And Tomas lived in, what do you call that little town? There's a little town in Utah that's called, gosh, I can't remember the name of it, but it's a little town, it's a biker town. And one day Tomas called up my Uncle Terry and said, you won't believe this, but that guy that burnt your cabin down came into the town, and we have captured him, we've kidnapped him, we've duct taped his mouth, we've hog-tied him, he's in the back of a warehouse, and we want to, you know, we beat the shit out of him, we've kicked the shit out of him, and we're ready to kill him or do whatever you want us to do to him, we'll do. And I can't believe this Tomas, who had been in prison before, had this conversation with my uncle. And Tomas, my uncle claimed that Tomas even offered to cut the guy's head off and send it to my Uncle Terry in a box as a trophy. Don't know if my uncle actually made that story up or if it was true, but kind of the end of the story is, gosh, I wish I could remember what that town was called. It's a famous little biker town. Anyway, so that next summer, when I went to Colorado on vacation in 1995, and we were all sympathetic with my uncle for losing his North Henson cabin, which was here, up here. He also had a Palmetto Gulch cabin, which is down here, and he was worried that uh, arson would come back and burn his other cabin. So while on vacation, he offered me to live at this cabin, and so I did for 5 months. And while I was there, uh, we we hired 4 Mexicans, and we did a bunch of yard work and put in solar panels and ran propane lines to 2 1,000-gallon propane tanks that were down here by the road. We also put in a 165-foot spanning suspension footbridge, and it went from here across to here. So there's your, well, probably more like 140 feet it looks like. But yeah, so I lived there for 4 months in the summer of 1995, and that stay there was basically to protect the cabin from an arsonist. And I guess that's the kind of the end of the story. But this is it's kind of, that's on the Alpine Loop. So if you ever go on the Alpine Loop and you're driving up past, there's a famous spot called Rose's Cabin. It's right. I think this is probably gonna be, yeah, there's Rose's Cabin. They're calling it Cabin on Trail to Hurricane Basin, but that's Rose's Cabin. It was a stage stop back in the 1800s, and then you pass Rose's Cabin and you head up, and there's a Alpine Gulch, and you can't miss that. You can't miss that cabin and the suspension footbridge. But Engineer Pass is right up here, up the top of this. And one time we took snowmobiles and we cruised up the snowmobiles up towards this American Lake, and then circled back around. This is called American Flats up here, and we explored around up here, and then took the snowmobiles back down through here, down through Alpine Gulch. At the top of Engineer Pass here, when you go down the backside of Engineer Pass, this is called Mineral Point. So the cabin's down here, Palmetto Gulch cabin, Engineer Pass, Mineral Point, and then Animas Forks is the ghost town here, and then down south of Animas Forks you get to Howardsville, and Silverton's back over there. So that's it for now.